Let's walk through some of your startup ideas.
One of the things I have two AI related startups. One is around a next generation podcast app.
Podcast app. So many people have tried it. I'm thinking of
Yeah.
like Leah Culver, her app. It's
Breaker.
Breaker was like the closest I saw to like a really interesting product that was going to hit escape velocity, but got acquired. Like, why hasn't a podcast app been able to hit mainstream? That's not Spotify
Yeah, I mean,
and Apple.
yeah, I mean, when you're Spotify and Apple, you have built-in distribution, right? Like you've got people coming for the music on the Spotify side, and Apple, you have default installs on device. So it is that's hard to compete against. In my mind, whenever I'm thinking about a startup, a new idea, I'm thinking about what is the defensibility, what is the moat that they can build, and then truly what is the order of magnitude improvement that is going to make people switch. People don't switch because you have trim silence. People don't switch because you have, a couple little features that they sound good on paper, but then the bigs catch on. Meaning, like, I'll give you an example. Like, I can't remember who it was first that did trim silence and saved us a bunch of time on podcasts, where it takes someone and if they pause for 4 to 5 seconds, it just cuts that out completely. I want to say it was Pocket Cast, but it could have been someone else. And what happened then is, you basically have that feature start to gain momentum. Product managers inside of Apple say, that's a pretty cool feature. And then they add it inside of the Apple Podcast app, 6 or 8 months later. And so you really are not going to win that way. It has to be something where the actual idea itself is so hard for the competition to pivot into and is so radically different that the consumer says, wow, this is a huge change in a huge new direction. That's why I want to make the move and abandon where I've been spending all of my time. Because, it's like redefining a social graph. It's like redefining your podcast graph takes time. And so it has to be a pretty great product to convince you to do so. So in my mind, the application of AI to podcasting could make podcasting a completely different beast. Meaning that there's no doubt in my mind that we go out and we train, all of AI on people's previous podcasts. So let's say I'm listening to the Tim Ferriss show. You could go in and say, I'm going to take that back catalog of 200 and some episodes, train on that data, convert it into transcripts and then train on it. And then basically you will be able to ask questions of the podcast and have conversations even with the host of the podcast. So, let's just say on my show, if you're watching the Kevin Rose show and I had an episode on some topic around, index investing, you could pause the podcast and say, hey, Kevin, before you go on, can you explain to me the difference between direct investing on Wealthfront and index investing and say something like SPY, like the S&P 500. And my AI version of myself would then pull from that corpus of data and be able to branch off, answer that question in real time, and then return back to the main podcast feed. So the idea of being able to interact with our podcasts is just, it's untapped and it needs to happen. So in my mind, that's going to be something that's just going to be a big unlock for a lot of people of being able to not just have a one-way listen experience, but actually being able to converse with their favorite hosts.
It kind of reminds me, I saw this tweet the other day, Sam Altman tweeted it. Movies are going to become video games, and video games are going to become something unimaginably better. It's kind of like a similar idea where movies, you watch a movie, there's no real way to interact with it. It's almost like
Right.
podcasts are going to become like almost like an interactive video game type experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be so cool. The depth and richness of the information in the shows will just be tenfold. It'll just be something where you'll be able to go down any avenue you want at any point in time. I can't tell you the number of podcasts, Peter Attia or Rhonda Patrick or, well-known scientists where you're listening to them and you're like, okay, I don't know what LP little a is when it comes to cholesterol numbers. Like, what the hell is that? But you let them continue on And then you're like, okay, should I open up another window and Google that or whatever, But in reality, you should just be able to pause and ask that question directly of the host, which is it's going to be a lot of fun. Someone needs to build this product.
And if you were building it, what would the business model be?
Yeah, I mean, probably what I would do is I would go out and acquire a podcast app that has some market share. There's a few of them out there that have, 1, 2%, call it Pocket Cast got acquired by Matt Mullenweg over at Automatic. Overcast is still out there as an independent. There's a few of them that you could just go and pick up. Then I'd rewrite it and start ingesting all the information. I'd work on some type of potential partnerships with other podcast hosts. So I'm not sure how they would react to that type of functionality. I have to imagine it would be a good thing for them and that their audience would be more engaged and stick around longer in episodes. But there's a lot of legality around how and when you crawl people's and use people's data in AI, especially if you're going to use their voice, right? So I'd probably go to some of the big hosts out there and create some partnerships and give them a little bit of the company as well to kind of be like brand promoters, so that they can go and really help get this on people's radar. And hopefully people would be like, damn, this is so much of a better experience. I'm willing to make that switch. And that would probably be the experiment just to get started.
I can only talk for myself. Like if someone came to me and was like, I've got this app, do you want Greg Eisenberg, where people can ask you like Greg Eisenberg AI, where people could ask, is this a good startup idea? Or has he covered any B2B fintech stuff? I think I would do it. And I think the reason I would do it is because it's so hard. Well, first of all, it's more interactive, but I think the selfish reason is, as you know, it's really hard to grow a podcast. Mm-hmm. The only way 90% of the reason why people listen to this podcast is I send an email to remind them that, hey, new episode with Kevin's out. And they sign up to gregeisenberg.com. I send it, they remember, they go to Spotify and Apple. If this new interactive app allowed me to own a piece of my audience, because with Spotify and Apple, you don't have that much data, would totally do it.
Right. Yeah, I think it could be pretty amazing to have something like that embedded. I've started to see some startups do this on websites as well. So imagine, Greg, if someone came to your website and was like, oh gosh, I was listening to one of his podcasts maybe like a couple months ago. I can't remember what it was, but it was this great guest and she was talking about, this particular startup and then just being able to type in that kind of high level and then automatically pull out the clip for you. Like that's starting to happen now with some people's podcasts. That is just so powerful in terms of just re-engaging. And then cross promotion wise could be really cool too, right? You can imagine listening to a Tim Ferriss show and just being like, hey, pause it real quick. Who else has talked about, this type of strength resistance training to failure? And then all of a sudden, have 4 other potential related podcasts that I can jump off and journey through. Could be really awesome.
It'd be really cool if you can license some of these creators or podcasters and put them on other websites, like building off your point. I'm thinking of this guy in Miami. His name's Bobby. Flav City. I think his username is Flav City. And what he does is he goes to Costco and he says, here's why this olive oil is bad. It's not in a glass bottle, microplastics. And he explains it. But for, $2 more, you can get this one. He explains it. And he's got this cult following. He's got millions of followers. And he created an e-commerce website where it's like basically Bobby approved stuff. And that's cool, but I have to like go to his website and it's not really in my flow. Like I order stuff on Instacart.
Right.
So if Instacart had like a little Bobby there.
Oh, 100%.
Right? And I could.
Oh my God, this is this is where it's going, right? It has to, right? Because we all have these people that we look up to, right? There's these people like for me, it's Dr. Peter Attia, it's Rhonda Patrick. It's like, some of these people where I'm like, or even like Tim, I'm like, hey, what protein powder is Tim using right now? Or, you can just imagine a world where, you have a bot that goes and pulls the real-time information and puts it right into your cart. I mean, wow, talk about conversion. That'd just be nuts.
I think the name for this, if I was naming this, it would be like what the WWTD, or what WW
Yeah.
what would Tim do? What would Peter Arteria do?
Yeah,
What would Greg
totally.
do? And that would be like the bot that that you sell, and then
Yeah,
you give Tim upside, right? Like if he's helping sell more
100%.
stuff, great.
Yeah, you could just say, what would they do? And just have it be generic and it could be
Exactly.
applied to anyone. Yeah,
Yeah.
that,
Cool.
that's awesome.
And just curious, like why wouldn't you build this?
Oh man, I think that there's one of those things where if you're a builder and you go off and you spread yourself too thin and you're trying to do too many things, you go an inch deep on everything and you just really don't do the product justice, right? Like you don't spend the time. And I'd have to really put together a team to go build this and be heavily involved in the early days. And